Gaussian distributed noise spectral density. However, one key part that I mentioned was that because every user is operating the same power level, oftentimes they're not. So there's often a need for this system to have something called a power control. Basically, this is due to receive signals that contain high power, can be closer to the receiver, that can essentially raise the noise floor for the weaker signals received by the given demodulator. So therefore, power control techniques are often needed to be able to mitigate this. And this is simply done by rapidly sampling the radio signal strength indicator levels at each mobile, and then also sending a power change command over the certain forward radio link, which is the constant power control to be able to. It's called the near far problem. It's to mitigate this so certain signals don't drown out other ones that tend to be closer to the receiver than ones that tend to be farther away. And it's a very common thing to be able to be used in this system is power control. And also another key part of this is the use of a rake receiver, because they're all spread out over one giant large bandwidth. Multipath, even just multipath signals that seem to would just interfere with it, they still contain useful information. So it use the system, CDMA systems typically use something called a rake receiver, which is several fingers that capture all those multipath signals, because they do contain useful information for the receiver to use. And that's just a typical explanation of the code division multiple access, which is ultimately the predecessor of OFDMA, as you might know, is 3G and 4G respectively. This is a block diagram of just a CDMA transmitter. It's passed through a typical binary phase shift keying modulator and passing through with, as you can see, the PN generation, then passing through the BPSK modulator, ultimately going through an oscillator to a carrier frequency and sent over the channel. And as I said before, the channel can just appear as typical Gaussian noise distribution if everyone is operating at more or less the same power level. So any interference with the receiver will just appear as noise, as long as they have the same code that is known by the transmitter receiver. It's kind of analogous to people at a cocktail party talking to one another, and only two people are speaking the same language, so therefore everybody else just sounds like noise. Well, they're able to fully understand each other because they know each other's language. It's a typical analogy used with this system. And as I said before, the key part of the code division multiple access technology is a spread spectrum characteristics. As you can see, it's pseudo-random sequences of orthogonal binary values transmitted over one large bandwidth, and there's XORed together, that it's known by the transmitter and receiver that only they correlate together. So as long as they know the same code, like I said, they be able to understand each other while everyone else just appears as noise. And as you can see here, this is just a generic way of generating all those unique codes for the transmitter and receiver to know throughout the communication system. And ultimately, I wanted to do this just to compare the two, orthogonal frequency division multiple access and code division multiple access. Just pros and cons between them both. OFDMA can tend to perform better when multiple delay spreading within the communication channel, because they can deal with inter-symbol interference better due to all the various things that I said, the orthogonality between the signals and the cyclic prefix, and also up to 4 times more users can be allocated to an OFDMA. However, with CDMA, when a single frequency is being used in a multicellular environment, CDMA can more effectively serve the users. And ultimately, probably one of the biggest benefits of CDMA is the security behind it. Because of that need for that distinct code between the transmitter and the receiver, it can be much more secure. And because depending on how complex the code is, only that transmitter and receiver will be able to listen to each other, and everyone else will just be able to appear as noise. And as long as they don't know that code, then they can't understand what's going on between the two. So it's kind of similar to an encryption mechanism that only the transmitter receiver can know each other because they know the code, they know the encryption code, and that's just the ultimate benefit of CDMA. And these are just the bit error rate plots of OFDMA and CDMA that I use in MATLAB. As you can see, one is for Gaussian on the left, CDMA, and then right is for OFDMA. I use just Gaussian channels and then AWGN channels. Just AWG, additive white Gaussian noise channels, which is a typical noise channel without taking into account several multipath delays. But as you can see, for both the Gaussian channels, OFDMA does provide a better bit error rate per over signal to noise ratio, as you can see there. And of course, if you look at the Raleigh channel, it's a little worse because it takes into account all the different aspects of multipath. Well, AWGN channel is just a basic noise channel used to model the two. But as you can see with the AWGN noise channel between CDMA and OFDMA, OFDMA does perform better in terms of bit error rate versus signal to noise ratio. And after that, I'm going to demonstrate my MATLAB program that I just showed you. This is the OFDMA one. As you can see, they both have the number of 4 data subcarriers, and the number of bit trees is 10 to the 4. Doing a random generate sequence, pass through the IFFT, and you can see the cycle prefix being added here. And then when you run it, you'll see it generate the plot that I just showed you. And as for the CDMA one, I did a very similar one as well. As you can see here, it's also the same specs. It has the same number of data bits, 10 to the 4. And as you can see here, you can see how it has the coding that I talked about, encoding and decoding between the transmitter and receiver, as you can see here. Plot this. And as you can see, it's the generated plot in Gaussian and the AWGN channel for CDMA and OFDMA. And it's the 2 plots that I just showed you. And that concludes my presentation.